Welcome back to another episode of Grace, Grit, and Grounds. I'm so glad you're here today. If you have a cup of coffee, go ahead and grab it and let's get to it. I'm back in the shop today and there's a piece of wood here that I'm putting on the lathe and it's walnut. It's not a bad piece. Honestly, it's got some good color, some nice grain, and you can see some of the sapwood running along the side. It's going to look really clean once the oil hits it. I'm already visualizing the end, even though I haven't even begun. But there's a knot sitting right there on the edge. It's not a polite little knot either. This one's in a bad spot. It's going to fight me the whole way through, I just know it. The kind of flaw that makes you pause for a second and ask yourself with that quiet question, is this worth it? Because at this point, I could cut it off. I could trim it down and lose the problem, make this piece something easier to work with, something smaller. But I like the size. And so I want to see what I can do with this. I decided to go ahead and keep this one. And as I started turning, that knot became exactly what I expected it to be, a problem. Every pass of the tool, I could feel it. The grain was changing, the resistance was shifting. I don't get to forget it's there. It reminds me constantly. And that's where I want to start today. Not with the flaw itself, but with the decision to keep working with it anyway. If we're going to talk honestly about men and work, we have to begin before anything really broke. Most conversations don't start there. Most conversations start at the fall of man. They start with sweat and struggle and everything being harder than it should be. And that makes sense because that's the world we know and we know it well. But it skips something important. It skips the moment where work was first given. Before sin, before failure, before consequences of our action, God forms Adam, breathes life into him, and then he gives him something to do. And that's the piece we don't always spend enough time with, because most of us were taught, or maybe just picked it up along the way, that work showed up as part of the curse, that it's something we endure, something we grind through, something we try to escape if we ever get the chance. But that's not where it started. Before anything broke, before sin ever entered into the picture, before there was anything to fix or fight against, before Adam even got married, God gave Adam something to do. He placed him in the garden and told him to tend it and to keep it, which means work wasn't a reaction to the failure on his part, but it was part of the original design. It was there at the beginning when everything was still good. When I first mounted this blank, it was square. It was rough. It was unrefined. The corners were spinning faster than my eyes could really track. And so the first thing I do is knock off those corners, and I'm bringing it into round. And even then, I don't quite trust it all the way. Periodically, I shut the lathe down and I reach out with my hand and sort of rest it against the piece as it slows, because my eyes can lie to me, I know that, but my hands won't. I can feel the high spots, I can feel the uneven places, the parts that still need attention. And there's something about that that feels familiar, because Genesis doesn't just tell us we were spoken into existence. It tells us we were formed, handled, shaped. There's a closeness there, an intimacy, an attention to detail. If you've worked with your hands long enough, you start to recognize that instinct in yourself, the instinct to stay with the piece, to feel it out, to keep shaping it until it becomes what it's meant to be. Nothing about Adam's creation was random, and neither is yours. It's a reflection. Adam is then placed in the garden with a job. As we mentioned, the job was to tend it and to keep it. Those two ideas stick closer than you can possibly imagine. To tend is to cultivate, to bring something out of what's already there. To keep is to guard it, to take responsibility for it. At the very beginning, man is both builder and protector, creative and watchful at the same time. I can't help but feel like this is a blueprint for manhood. And here's where we usually take a wrong turn. We automatically jump to the fall, and we define Adam by his failure. We talk about the fall like it's the only thing that matters, but we don't know how long he lived in that garden before that moment. We don't know how many days he spent learning, shaping, naming, growing into the role as he was given. And we definitely don't spend much time talking about what happened after. Because Adam didn't quit. He didn't lay down in the dust and say, "That's it. I've ruined my life. I quit. I give up." He stepped into a harder world than he could possibly ever imagine, and he kept going. He worked the ground. He raised a family. He loved his wife. He lived a life on the other side of failure. That part gets overlooked all the time, but it shouldn't. Now let me bring you back to this piece for a minute, because I'm shaping this bowl, and that knot, it just won't go away. I can cut into it. I can shape around it a little bit. But the reality is I can't erase it without losing too much of the piece. So I make a decision. I go as far as I safely can, and then I leave it. Not as a defect, but as part of the story of this bowl. I've mentioned before that when I turn these bowls, I'm not just shaping a bowl. I'm telling a story. I'm telling the story of a tree. I'm telling the story of a board. I'm telling the story of myself. When I work these pieces, I can't help but think about God, myself, and how I fit in God's plan. So I decide to build a rim around it. I decide to let this knot become a feature instead of a flaw. And in the end, once that oil hits it, I don't think it's going to ruin the piece. I think it's going to give it character. I think it's going to give it the weight that I want it to have. I think this piece might be another representation of who I am. I think in the end, when you look at the knot and the rim and this whole bowl, I think it's going to tell you that this thing came from somewhere real, somewhere with purpose. And I think this is where a lot of men get stuck. Not out there somewhere, but right here in this quiet place when nobody else really sees it. Because some of you listening, you carry things. Maybe it's one moment that went sideways in your past. Maybe it was a decision that you wished that you could take back. Maybe it's not even one thing. Maybe it's a stretch of time where it feels like everything you touched didn't turn out the way you thought it would. And after a while, that kind of weight starts talking back to you. It starts yelling at you that you missed your shot, that you had your chance, but you blew it. That whatever you were supposed to be, that version of you that isn't on the table anymore and can never be, and if you sit in that long enough, you don't just feel tired, you start to feel finished and maybe a little bit alone. And if you're feeling done, and maybe it's not physically, maybe you're still showing up, maybe you're still doing what has to be done, but there's something in you that pulls back. You stop stepping into things the same way you did before. You stop reaching out. You stop building. You start living a little smaller, a little quieter, trying not to mess up again. I get that. I really do. I've been there more often than I like to admit. But Adam's life pushes back on that idea in a way we don't talk about enough. Because, yes, he fell. There's no soft way to say that. What he did has consequences that echo all the way down to us. But that wasn't the end of his story. He didn't disappear. He didn't get written off. He didn't lay down and just let that moment define everything that came after. He got up, he stepped into a harder and harsher world, and he kept going. He worked the ground, he raised his family, and he lived a life on the other side of failure. And maybe that's the part we need to hear more now than ever before, because the question was never really whether a man would fall. We know that's going to happen. That part seems to come with the territory. The real question is what a man does next, whether he stays down or whether, even if it's slow, even if it's messy, even if he's not sure he's got it in him, whether he gets back up and steps into what's still in front of him. There's something deeper going on there too, because Adam wasn't just given a task. He was given a role. When you look closely at what he was doing, he was standing in the garden as both a priest and a king. As a priest, he was in that role because he is in the presence of God, tending to what belongs to God. He was also a king because he was given the authority to steward and shape what had been entrusted to him by God Almighty. That combination is important because it means his work wasn't just practical, it was also sacred. And that wiring in him didn't disappear. You can see it in boys before anyone teaches them anything. Give them space and they'll start building. Give them something broken and they'll try to fix it. There is a quiet instinct to take what is and to shape it into something more. That doesn't come from nowhere. That traces all the way back to the garden. But I think here's where it gets really personal. A man without something to tend, something to build, something to take responsibility before, he doesn't become peaceful. He becomes restless. It doesn't always show up heavy or loud. Sometimes it looks just simply like drifting, like energy with nowhere to go, like a man trying to fill space with distractions because he's lost sight of what's actually his to carry. I've seen this play out in my own life because when I step into the shop and I've got something in front of me, like this bowl, something real, something I can put my hands on and work through, something inside me settles into a level of peace and calmness that I can't even begin to explain. In fact, it's really hard to explain if you've never felt it yourself. But there's a kind of quiet that shows up, not because everything in life is figured out, but because for that moment, in that space, you're where you're supposed to be. You're engaged and you're doing something that asks something of you. And it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be impressive. Nobody else even has to see it. It just has to matter to you in that moment. And the more I've paid attention to that, the more I've realized that didn't start in the shop. It goes all the way back to the garden. It goes all the way back for me when I was a kid. Because even when I was young, I was always looking for something to do, something to build. It didn't matter where we were or what we had. Wood out back, scrap boards, couch cushions in the living room. I was always trying to turn it into something. I love forts. I built forts in trees. I built forts on the ground. Sometimes when I didn't have enough wood to build up, I would dig in the dirt, build a hole, throw a board over the top of it, cover it with a little bit of dirt and some leaves, and call it a fort. But honestly, looking back, it wasn't really about the building of the fort. It was about taking what was there and bringing some kind of order to it, shaping it, claiming it, making something out of it, even if it was rough and half falling apart. And most of my forts, well, they were not structurally sound, but they were fantastic. Nobody sat me down and taught me that. It was there all along. And the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced that's not just personality. I think that's design. That traces again all the way back to Adam, placed in a garden that was good, but not finished, and told to tend and keep it, to step into something living, something unfinished, and give himself to it for his life. And I think that shows up in more men than we realize. It might look different. For some, it's building with their hands. For others, it's leading a family, maybe running a business, serving a team, stepping into a calling that takes years to grow into. But underneath it all, there's a pattern, a pull towards responsibility, towards shaping something, toward bringing order where there isn't any yet. And when a man steps into that, even in a small way, something in him starts to come alive again. So maybe the better question isn't what went wrong. Maybe the better question you could be asking yourself is, where has God placed me? And what has he put in front of me to tend? Where is my field? What's been entrusted to me that needs my attention, my effort, my care? Because that's where things start to come back into focus. Not by erasing the past or fixing the failures, but stepping into the work that's still in front of you, still in front of me. And that's what this piece reminds me of. It's not perfect. It was never going to be perfect. But it's still worth finishing. So I'm going to keep turning it. And this is where it ends up. You know, the knot's still there. But it's not the same story anymore. Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being about getting rid of the flaw in this board, in this bowl. It started being about building around it, strengthening what was already there, working with it instead of fighting against it. You can see that in the rim. I'll be honest, when I finished this piece, the rim was thicker than I had planned. It had to be. That knot forced the issue. I couldn't go as thin as I normally do, as thin as I wanted, without risking the whole piece coming apart. So I adjusted. I cut a little bit underneath. I gave it a little bit of a lift. I let the edge carry more weight than the rest of the bowl. And now that's where your eye goes to. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Because it's held. Because it didn't break. And I think there's something in that for you as well. Because a lot of you are looking at your life the same way I was looking at the knot in the beginning of this build, thinking this one disqualifies the whole piece, thinking that you've got to cut it out or start over or scrap the whole thing and hope for something better and cleaner next time. But that's not always how it works. Sometimes the better move is to stay with it, to build around what didn't go right, to strengthen the places that took the hit, to let the weight of it shape you into something a little more grounded, a little more aware, a little harder to break next time. And when a man chooses that, when he chooses to stay instead of walking away, something shifts. Not all at once, not in some big dramatic moment normally, but a steady, quiet, real way. Something changes. It may not look like what you thought your life was going to be. There may be parts of your story that you wish weren't there. Things that you would change if you could. Moments that linger with you when it gets quiet. That doesn't mean it's over. Adam stepped out of the garden and into a world that was harsher and harder than anything he had known in his whole life. And he still worked it. He still built a life in it. He still raised what was put in front of him. And I'm telling you, that's what real men do. Not perfectly, not without failure, definitely not without scars. But they stay. They take what's in front of them, even if it's not what they wanted, and they go to work on it. They build around it. They carry it. They shape it into something that can still stand. And if you're sitting there right now wondering if it's worth getting back up, wondering if you've got anything left to give, listen carefully. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to fix everything in one move. You just have to stay. Stay in the work. Stay in the field that's in front of you. Because even now, it can still be good. It can still hold. And one day you'll look back on what you've built. You'll put your hands on it and you'll say, yeah, yeah, I didn't quit when it got hard. I stayed. I didn't walk away. I didn't lay down on the side of the road. I worked the piece. I ran the race. I loved my people. I cultivated my land. I protected what mattered. I did what I was called to do. If something I've said today resonates with you, if something in this spoke to you in a deep way, I encourage you to like and subscribe. It helps more than you know to get this message to others that need to hear it. I would also ask you to maybe send a link to a friend, someone that needs to hear what I've said. I'm so glad you chose to join me today on Grace, Grit, and Grounds. It's been great to be in the shop again. I want to encourage you that grace builds what grit sustains. My friends, I'll see you in the next one.